Great. Okay. Share screen. All right. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Yes. Great. So, rhetorical devices. A rhetorical device is a technique used by a speaker to encourage or provoke an emotional response or visual image in an audience through the use of language. Rhetorical devices have been around for thousands of years, since the time of the ancient Greeks. If you listen to some of the speeches and some of the greatest speakers of all time, you will hear these techniques in these speeches. And if you're a Toastmaster, if you want to get, or any kind of speaker, if you want to get to the next level of speaking, you have to know about these techniques and these devices and use them in your speeches. In my previous speeches, my first two speeches on these rhetorical devices, I talked about different devices. I'm just going to do a brief review of the devices I've talked about in the past. So on my first speech, I talked about the metaphor. The metaphor is a figure of speech in which a word or phrase is applied to an object or action to which it is not literally applicable. So a classic example of a metaphor is raining cats and dogs. Metaphors are also similar to idioms, which are phrases that have different meanings. But here you see, obviously, you would never see cats and dogs raining, but this phrase provokes the image in your mind of a very torrential, large rainfall. The other rhetorical advice I talked about in my previous speech was the chiasmus. The chiasmus are words or concepts repeated in reverse order. One of the most famous chiasmus statements was made during John F. Kennedy's inaugural address, where he said, "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." So they switched the words around. Your country can do, and you can, your country. So repeating words in reverse order. In the past, I also talked about the anaphora. The anaphora is the repetition of a word or phrase at the beginning of successive clauses. One of the most famous anaphora speeches of all time was in Martin Luther King's speech, and it was just Martin Luther King's birthday a few days ago. In his speech, he used the anaphora, "Let freedom ring from the prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire. Let freedom ring from the heightening Alleghenies of Pennsylvania. Let freedom ring from the snow-capped Rockies of Colorado." So as you can see, he used the same phrase in these three different sentences, and that constitutes the rhetorical device anaphora. I also talked in a previous speech about the epistrophe. The epistrophe is the opposite of an anaphora. In an epistrophe, you see the repetition of a word or phrase at the end of successive phrases, clauses, or sentences. So a famous epistrophe is "of the people, by the people, for the people." So instead of having repetition of a phrase at the beginning, it's at the end of each clause. I talked about alliteration. Alliteration is the repetition of consonant sounds in two or more neighboring words or syllables. This is one of my favorite alliteration sentences. Smart speakers sprinkle their speeches with carefully chosen power words. So here you're seeing the repetition of the S sound and the repetition of the C sound. So that's alliteration. And finally, in my previous speech, I talked about the simile. The simile is a figure of speech comparing one thing to another of a different kind to make a description more emphatic or vivid. Examples of similes are brave as a lion, cold as ice, he smokes like a chimney. So here you see two terms that are either connected by as or like. Brave as lion, cold as ice, smokes like a chimney. So I talked about these things in my previous speeches, and my previous speeches are on our YouTube site if you want to review any of those. Now I'm going to introduce you to three more rhetorical devices. The first rhetorical device I'm going to talk about is the triad or triad. A triad is a figure of speech where three successive words or phrases are used to express a central idea. Examples of a triad are the good, the bad, and the ugly. That was the name of a movie.
Make my day.
Clint Eastwood, that's right. Blood, sweat, and tears. So three triad. Tri is three. And this one I like. This was a quote from President Franklin Roosevelt when he was giving advice to speakers. And he said, be sincere, be brief, and be seated. Good advice for any speaker. The next rhetorical device I'm going to talk about is the antithesis. The antithesis is the pairing of exact, opposite, and contrasting words or ideas. Examples of the antithesis are no pain, no gain. Where there's smoke, there's fire. That's certainly true. Easy come, easy go. So you're comparing opposite things, usually in the same sentence. And the final rhetorical device I'm going to talk about today is onomatopoeia. Now, I remember hearing about this when I was a kid in Sesame Street. Does anyone remember what an onomatopoeia is? Onomatopoeia is a word that imitates the sound it refers to. So examples of onomatopoeia are, her heart went pitter-patter. There was a large thud at the door. The wave crashed against the boat. So these words that I've outlined and read are all examples of onomatopoeia. Triad, antithesis, and onomatopoeia. Okay, now I'd like to play for you a short clip from the recent speech by HAKEEM JEFFRIES, who is the new leader of the Democratic Congress caucus. And he gave this speech after the 15th would turn out to be the 15th election for the Speaker of the House. And unfortunately, this speech was done at 1 o'clock in the morning. I happened to be up at the time and I heard the speech, and it was just a phenomenal speech. And after I listened to it, I was trying to figure out, why was this speech so great? And I looked at it again and I realized that he used a lot of the rhetorical devices that I talked about today. So I'm going to play a clip from the speech, and then I'm going to do a little narration to point out the different rhetorical devices he used in the speech.
The American people.
Okay, I played a bit of it. Could you hear it?
We heard it, yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
okay, okay, so all right, go ahead.
Understandably, after the events of this week, recognize that the Congress is at a fork in the road.
Okay, so right away, he's using a metaphor, or it also could be called an idiom, where he talked about a fork in the road. So obviously, he's not talking about an actual road. He's talking about a point of inflection, a point where the Congress is going to make a choice between different paths, the fork in the road. So that's a metaphor or idiom.
And are asking the question, what direction will we choose? On this first day, I do not pretend to answer that question on behalf of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, but we do extend our hand of partnership to you and want to make clear that we extend and intend to try to find common ground whenever and wherever possible on behalf of the American people.
Okay, so here he's using alliteration. He's saying whenever and wherever. You see the consonant sounds next to each other.
Not as Democrats, not as Republicans, not as independents, but as Americans.
Okay, so that was an anaphora. He said not as Democrats, not as Republicans, not as independents, and also was a triad. He used these three statements one after another. So it was a triad and an anaphora.
But I also want to make clear that We will never compromise our principles.
Okay, now he's about to go into his climax, and he's gonna do something that I've never heard or seen anyone do before. He's going to have a series of different antithetical statements, and he's also going to use alliteration, and he's going to give 26 antithetical statements from the letters A to Z. This is kind of phenomenal.
House Democrats will always put American values over autocracy,
A,
benevolence over bigotry,
B,
the Constitution over the code,
C,
democracy over demagogues,
D,
economic opportunity over extremism,
E,
freedom over fascism,
F,
governing over gaslighting,
G,
hopefulness over hatred,
H,
inclusion over isolation,
I,
justice over judicial overreach,
J,
knowledge over kangaroo courts,
K,
liberty over limitation,
L,
maturity over Mar-a-Lago,
M,
normalcy over negativity,
N,
opportunity over obstruction,
O,
people over politics,
P,
quality of life issues over QAnon,
Q,
reason over racism,
R,
substance over slander,
S,
triumph over tyranny,
T,
understanding over ugliness,
U,
voting rights over voter suppression,
V,
working families over the well-connected,
W,
xenial over xenophobia,
X,
yes we can over you can't do it,
Y,
and zealous representation over zero-sum confrontation. We will always do the right thing by the American people. So let us not grow weary of doing good, for the American people will reap the benefit of the harvest if we do not give up. God bless you, God bless the House, and God bless the United States of America.
Wow,
how about that?
that was great. Wow, I love it. That
Yeah,
was great.
yeah. All right, so in summary, I've talked about these 9 rhetorical devices: the metaphor, chiasmus, anaphora, epistrophe, alliteration, simile, triad, antithesis. And you saw examples of all of these, except he didn't do any onomatopoeia, but he used almost a lot of these in his speech right there. So I would like just hold a second and have everyone take out their phones and just take a picture of this, so you can have these devices on your phone and maybe look them up, and in the future use some of these or many of these in your speeches. And also, I'm going to post this speech on this speech that I just did on YouTube section. And so if you want to review some of these rhetorical techniques, you can do it that way too.
Okay, let me take my picture, Jose.
Oh, you didn't got it? You got it yet?
Oh, wait a minute, here we go. I got it, yes.
Everyone got it? Okay. The end.
Very good.